Attend! We have heard of the thriving of the throne of Denmark, how the folk kings flourished in former days, how those royal athelings earned that glory. Was it not shield shuffling that shook the halls, took mead benches, taught encroaching foes to fear him, who, found in childhood, lacked clothing? Yet he lived and prospered, grew in strength and stature under the heavens, until the clans settled in the seacoast neighboring over the whale road. All must obey him and give tribute. He was a good king. There we go. That is the opening 10 or so lines of Beowulf. So this is the Penguin Classics edition, translated by Michael Alexander. And this is a verse translation. And I watched Steve Donahue's video just this morning, and it stands out to me, his reaction to this. So you can see there, maybe. Oh, nope, not going to be able to see that. Anyway, translated with an introduction, notes by Michael Alexander. The Penguin Classics edition has everything that you would expect from a Penguin Classics. It's got a decent-sized introduction. It's got notes at the end. It has everything self-contained in there that you would need for a student of any great work of literature that has Penguin Classic. It does justice to the poem. Beowulf is a epic poem that has been endlessly translated in the last 150 years. And every one of them is a little different in how they are. And earlier this week I talked about J.R.R. Tolkien's translation and how I don't think that it was a great translation for readability, and that it is not a complete translation, that if Tolkien himself had intended to publish said translation of Beowulf, what we got now would be wildly different from what he would have sent out to get published. I think that he was making decisions more for accuracy of translation of the text than on trying to have something that is closely mirroring what the text itself is trying to do, or something that tries to imitate tries to be incredibly readable. And today, I'm talking about the Michael Alexander translation, which again, in the Penguin Classics version, falls into one of those categories very firmly. It is attempting to imitate the sound, the pattern of the Anglo-Saxon poetry. And you can hear that in those 10 lines, but let's read them again and just listen for the alliteration. It is very, very present in there. And so you can tell very early on that that is going to be one of the focal points, because it has a very strong presence here. And so by this alliterative verse, what it is each line has repetition at the starts of words, usually, of a consonant. And so you will hear it anywhere from 2 to 4 times, usually in the first half, and then again in the second half of each line. And so you can hear those emphasized consonants along the way. Attend! We have heard of the thriving of the throne of Denmark, how the folk kings flourished in former days, how those royal athelings earned that glory. Was it not shield shuffling that shook the halls, took mead benches, taught encroaching foes to fear him, who found in childhood lacked clothing, yet he lived and prospered, grew in strength and stature under the heavens, until the clans settled and the sea coasts neighboring over the whale road all must obey him and give tribute. He was a good king. And so, there's some lines in there that don't follow that, but a lot of them really do. And that was one of the biggest takeaways as I was reading through this, was that what Michael Alexander does well is attempting to bring life to some of that alliterative verse that would naturally have been found in there. And it's a tough thing to do when you're taking an outdated, unspoken language. Nobody speaks Old English anymore. And trying to turn it into modern, even though they're two, Old English is a root of our language that we speak today. It is not possible to perfectly imitate that in every facet. And so the translator has to make a choice, a deliberate, intentional choice on what they want to focus on. And we have here the decision to try to bring forth that Anglo-Saxon poetry. And I find that it is a more readable text in terms of just sitting down for enjoyment. A much faster moving experience than what I had in Tolkien's Beowulf. And a lot of that stems from, I think, the approaches of the translator. Again, Tolkien had not any intention of his translation being published and seeing the light of day. I haven't fact-checked this, but one of my commenters had mentioned that he had done the translation in the 1920s. And that was very early in Tolkien's life. There were decades to follow of scholarship that he could have built upon and brought forth and put into that. And so as great as that translation is to have, as great as those notes are, I wonder still how vastly, wildly different it would have been. But we don't have that here with Michael Alexander. That's not the problem. Michael Alexander put this forth as a package to be published. And it's a more polished translation, I think, which makes it a much better reading experience, start to finish. The introduction, let's just say, watch Steve's video. His thoughts very much mirror mine on that. The dismissive hand-waving that Michael Alexander does towards Tolkien himself, who was a very renowned scholar for Beowulf. It's not aimed at Tolkien as a translator of the text, because there was no translation of Tolkien's text at the time. But dismissing The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings as children's stories. It says something about a character of a person to put something like that in the introduction, to take jabs at people who have not just been monumental in literature in general. Tolkien is a pillar of the fantasy genre that we wouldn't have today, nearly to the extent that we do now without him. But he was, even more so, arguably, a pillar of Beowulf studies and Old English studies. And so to do that, to dismiss, in a way, to belittle, demean one of the great voices, that's a bold choice. And while the translation itself I like better for reading, this is not a translation I think I would want to have on my shelf, because I don't think it's one that I would ever revisit. The notes in there are fine, but I found Tolkien's notes to be incredibly more valuable than the ones that are in the Penguin Classics edition. And I do know that I have a different translation on my shelf that I will like more than this. But if you are looking for a entry point into Beowulf, this is not a terrible entry point. It is not my recommended entry point. But Penguin Classics is always a safe place to go because they do a good job of vetting out what they're going to choose for the translation. And if most of you are like me, then especially if it's the first time I'm reading a text ever, I skip those introductions. Because a lot of times, and case in point, about 2 years ago, I tried sitting down and reading Gilgamesh. I was like, okay, I'll start with the introduction here, and it's going into nuances within the poem. I'm like, I don't even know any context on this. I haven't read it, and spoilers. So, if you're like me at all, you're gonna skip that introduction anyway. But I think I'm fine on this. This is, as a book, I like it less than the Tolkien. As a translation, I like this slightly better than Tolkien's translation. But it's a very close race there. And if I were to provide a recommendation between the two, I guess I would have to vet out what you're looking for. If you're looking for just something readable of Beowulf, I'd probably point you to this. If you're looking for something that you'd like to go back and, revisit multiple times over a couple of decades, I would, without hesitation, recommend the Tolkien one instead. So, there you go. There's my thoughts on this translation. I'll be back this weekend with the Burton raffle because I'm well over halfway through with that one. I certainly have thoughts on it. It's fun how wildly different each translation has been so far, and I think it'll be fun. And I look forward to what Steve Donahue and Micah Cummins have to say on the Burton raffle translation as well. So be sure to go check out their channels. I'll have their videos on this translation linked down below, so you can go check them out, and we'll see if I can get in sync with them for the rest of this month. Thank you, BookTube.